Well, how successful has NATO been in all this? And step back a bit. Should the West be in Libya at all? And does this perhaps raise something of a green light for further intervention in other parts of the world? Lots of questions, hopefully able to answer some of them. Yasmin Qureshi, Labour MP for Bolton South East. She opposed military intervention in Libya. And Oliver Kamm, leader writer for The Times, and an advocate, is that fair to say, Oliver, for NATO involvement?
That's right.
Yasmin, can I start with you? At the time when you said you didn't want intervention by NATO, what was your reasoning for that?
Three reasons. Firstly, I feel that it is wrong for us to interfere in the affairs of sovereign nations. Secondly, I realised that the whole purpose was not just to, as they were saying, to try to save people in Benghazi, but the whole purpose of that intervention was to have a regime change, because the UN article actually said, the provision said, and any other means. And that suggests that you could do whatever you wanted to do, boots on the ground or whatever forms of intervention. And thirdly, we go around the world intervening in countries like Iraq and others, and actually we leave them worse off than we actually started off.
Well, now that you have the gift of 2020 hindsight, could you say that you were wrong in that assessment? Well, there were no boots on the ground, were there, Yasmin?
No,
and
there
it
were
was
no
largely a grassroots revolution.
No, there was no boots on the ground. But if you think about the number of buildings that have been destroyed, if you think about the number of people who've been killed, maimed and injured, and if you think about the fact, and this is a fundamental international law issue, which is, don't go around interfering in regime change, because if that's the case, then why don't we do something in Israel? Why don't we do when Americans were causing mayhem and destruction in South America and the rest of the world, right? Why is it we don't seem to want to deal with those?
Okay.
And can I just finish? And all these countries, when America intervened and interfered in the whole of South America for so many years and caused so much instability and deaths there, they said, oh, well, we're doing there for humanitarian purposes. When we go in Iraq, it's humanitarian purpose, although we killed God knows how many millions of people. And yet, and we're still saying, I'm sorry, for me, we shouldn't have been interfering in Libya. And I'd like to know now, when all the reconstruction takes place, who's going to be paying for that? Is America going to pay for it? Are we going to pay for it? Or is it Libyan oil money which is going to be paying for other companies to go out, be contractors and rebuild the country?
So you absolutely categorically would not agree that this has been a success. As far as we can see at the moment, and David Cameron has said just as much, that we have to be careful about this, but this has been a successful campaign. You don't think so?
Well, of course he's going to say it's a successful campaign, but I like to see what happens in years down the road, actually what happens with Libya. And I like to see that how are we going to continue to help. I mean, Mahmoud Gaddafi can't be found, his family can't be found, yet the NATO are still carrying on airstrikes. And everybody said this isn't about regime change, yet they were attacking his home, they were attacking where his family home is. How can that not be a regime change? And that is and what I'm concerned about is a very, very dangerous precedent, because so far we've been involved in regime change, America has been involved in regime change. Other countries like China, Russia, India will be able to argue in future, and Israel does all the time. It goes around bombing places because it says, oh, my safety is in issue, or we're doing this for human rights purposes or whatever, and yet we're going to just allow other countries also will then jump onto the same bandwagon and say, well, if you can go for a regime change in Libya, then why can't we do intervention in, I don't know, India in Pakistan, or Pakistan in India, or wherever?
Well, let's bring Oliver Kamm in on this, because it's unusual, isn't it, to hear, lots of debates about the future of liberal intervention, not that many voices, though, saying this is nothing liberal about this, and this has been a cynical, illiberal intervention, and actually a bid for another oil grab. What do you make of that, Oliver?
That's nonsense, and it won't have been lost on your listeners that Ms Qureshi's long and prolix answer didn't engage with the point you raised. Of course she's wrong. She predicted during the campaign that there would be massive civilian casualties, and this would be exactly like Iraq. It hasn't been at all. It's been a measured campaign involving NATO air power that has stopped an illegitimate ruler from attacking not his own people, but a captive population against whom he threatened genocide. I'm appalled, I'm horrified to hear an an MP nominally of the left defends state sovereignty with such vigour. There is normally a presumption of state sovereignty, but when an illegitimate regime attacks a captive population, then it's a widely accepted principle, accepted by the UN General Assembly, that there is a moral compulsion, never mind a right, to intervene to protect that population. NATO has done it and has preserved both the possibility of a just settlement in Libya and served British national interests as well.
Yasmin Qureshi, would you have sat and watched a possible massacre, well, an almost certain massacre, taking place in Benghazi?
Well, yes, we're being told that there was going to be an almost certain massacre. I'm sorry. I know Oliver says he's appalled about what my comment is, but look, Israel goes around killing Palestinians all the time. I don't remember Mr. Kamm or any of the other people or neocons like him saying, let's go and intervene there. They won't even criticize illegal settlements that have been carried out. I mean, something so minor, and in the USA goes and vetoes the UN resolution criticizing Israel for that. And yet they're all concerned about the human rights issues of Libya. I'm sorry, I don't buy this. This is a concern about Libya. If Libya hadn't been an oil state, I would like to have seen what there had been an intervention.
Okay.
There are many countries in the world, right? We had Sudan. So much massacres took place there. I don't remember anybody saying, all right, let's go and intervene in there.
Okay, Yasmin, just let me bring Oliver Kamm back on this, because would it be easier to be less cynical about Western intervention if you didn't know that actually, despite criticising Colonel Gaddafi for being a mad dog and other things, America and the UK were doing deals on a very high level for intelligence? I mean, all of this stuff that's coming out from Human Rights Watch about some very cosy little agreements between our secret services and their ability to question our suspects. It does seem as if it's difficult to don that armour of a white knight when you have that much mire that you've trodden through.
International politics is certainly a morally tainted business. Before I answer that point, I hope you will allow me to correct Ms. Qureshi's fatuous remarks. I'm, for a start, not a neoconservative. In the Times newspaper, you will find in its leading article yesterday on the protests against the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra at the Albert Hall, the Times newspaper is strongly critical of Israeli security policies and settlements policies. You can't have that one on me, Ms. Qureshi, but the idea that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians is obviously absurd. Now, let me deal with your point,
why don't you
Anita.
ask the Palestinians how they feel about it? 4 million of them have been...
You've had a lot of time, Yasmin. We'll come back to you, but let Oliver continue with his point.
Let me deal with the question of the tainted record of Western nations in foreign policy generally, and specifically in that region. Of course you're correct. There have been many policies throughout the region, for example, a tilt to Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war, that were not only wrong in principle, but disserved Western national interests. It's an extraordinary suggestion that having made mistakes, sins of omission and commission in foreign policy, we now are not free to correct our mistakes and intervene to protect a captive population. The idea that there's some nefarious agenda here, Ms. Qureshi remarked on Libya as being an oil state. In fact, the Western interests with regard to oil supplies were very much served by leaving Gaddafi in place, not taking him out. This was a good deed in a weary world in which we've preserved the political space for Libyans themselves to create a new state as part of the Arab Spring, and I strongly support it.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Well, I mean, it's fine for Mr. Kamm to say that, well, because we made past mistakes, now we're going to do right. But I am sure that when we were making these past mistakes, Mr. Kamm would have been one of those people who would have been saying there were the right things to do. As I understand, he was very much pro-supporting the Iraq intervention, and everybody knows that that was a complete debacle. So I'm not sure, with all due respect, Mr. Kamm, as to whether this, as you call it, is a good intervention,
okay,
will actually be a good intervention.
Just for a moment, take the focus off Mr. Kamm and just look at the British government's behaviour per se. Now, the documentation that has come out, and we haven't seen it yet, but I assume it's going to be made public fairly shortly from Human Rights Watch, would suggest that your leader, Gordon Brown, and your leader, Tony Blair, despite the fact that at times the relationship was pretty sour and they were criticising Colonel Gaddafi, and it was clear that he was a despot who treated his public very, very badly, there were deals being done with him to question suspects of terror in these renditions that we have spoken about many times on this network. Now, what do you make of that? Are you critical of your own party for the part it played at that time?
Yes, I am. I don't become party political here. I think, Tony Blair was wrong to take us into the war in Iraq. And on this issue about renditions, which has been happening not only with Libya, with other parts of the world as well, I think it's appalling that a Labour government was involved in it, and I'm appalled that a Conservative government carried on doing it as well, and I'm appalled that the Americans were involved in it. And that is what makes me so cynical about all of this. I mean, I'm being hard here, or maybe I'm not being so sympathetic enough, but that's precisely because there is murky international politics going on here. We seem to choose who our friends are for our convenience, and then we sort of go against them. And what we did, Labour was in power, involving in rendition or our secret services, was completely wrong, abhorrent.
All right, and just finally, when it comes to intervention, are you binary about this? Just no intervention ever? Because there was a time when there was a very real risk, and in fact there had been a lot of killings of Muslims in Kosovo, for example, that there was an intervention which now history has suggested was a great success and saved a great many lives. Yasmin Qureshi, do you think that was wrong at that time?
That was about the only intervention, Kosovo, which was right. And the reason for that, and I know quite a lot about Kosovo because actually after the intervention I spent 2 years working for the United Nations mission in Kosovo, helping to rebuild the judicial system. So I know a lot about the Kosovo conflict. But I think the situation there was that you'd seen what had happened in Bosnia, and you can see from what Milosevic was up to what was going to happen in Kosovo. And that was done for genuinely, in international law, you can intervene on what's called either self-defense or intervention for humanitarian purposes. That was immediate humanitarian crisis that was happening there and then, and it had to be prevented. With things like Libya, with things like other parts of the world, right, things been going on for years. In Iraq, things been going on for years and years, and all of us have played have not been honest brokers in these disputes, and therefore in situations like that I don't think we should be interfering. Yes, if it's suddenly a sudden situation that has happened, it is what can be properly defined as international humanitarian assistance, i.e. immediate and urgent, then that's right. And that was Kosovo. Kosovo does not fall into the category of any of the other interventions we've had.
Well, we could talk about this for a lot longer, but alas, time is against us. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Oliver Kamm, leader writer for The Times, and Yasmin Qureshi, Labour MP for Bolton South East.